So obviously, if you clicked on this video, you should know that there are massive, massive spoilers for the end of Final Fantasy VII Remake. So I'm going to give you a minute here to click off if you need to, if it's auto-playing or you accidentally clicked on it for whatever reason, even though it says spoiler right up there in the title. Go beat Final Fantasy VII Remake first, okay? And then come back here and discuss it in the comments and all of that. Also, yeah, the comments are going to be full of spoilers as well. So, you know, you've been warned at this point. But I just beat Final Fantasy VII Remake a little over an hour ago, and I noticed some things there, and I also have some concerns because I'm a little worried about how complicated they're going to make things. Overly complicated, we'll say that. But I wanted to give some of my raw thoughts and reflection on what I have seen here, because it is certainly not what I was expecting to see after Final Fantasy Remake for Midgar ended. And the biggest thing here is, and I understand now why Final Fantasy VII purists are annoyed, frustrated, upset, because they're not going to see the rest of the game that they know it to be. What they have effectively done here is work to alter the current timeline that we know of on the PS1, and they did it throughout the game through like odd fourth wall breaking things and pretty much saying that they acknowledge that there is a timeline that we all know of that a lot of people wanted to see remade completely in like PS4 and PS5 visuals similar to Advent Children, but they don't want to do that. So the entire way through, towards the end, there's this massive shift where it gets very supernatural, I'll say, and we basically go and shatter the timeline. We do it. Like, it's not even like they guide us to the point where we end up doing it at the end and breaking free of the remake that a lot of people wanted. And my initial thought for that, right off the bat, I'll tell you, is excitement. I am very excited to see what they're going to do with this, but it's also a double-edged sword because it will get, I think, pretty dangerous if they go in a certain direction that has to do with multiple timelines, multiverses. That can at times be a recipe for disaster, and I'm a little concerned because I have a theory as to how they're going to tackle this, and I do not like the direction at all if they do it. But let's talk about what happened here. So essentially, throughout the game, you're following the path that you know about through Final Fantasy VII through Midgar. So the initial big city, town, big area, you're going through it. They do it all. They drop the Sector 7 plate. All of this stuff happens. And for the most part, I enjoyed the entire way through. But then we get to the end, and it's basically Chapter 18. Like, it just goes off the rails, right? You escape from Shinra Tower and all of this. You get, the motorbike, the truck, all this stuff. But then you get to the end, and Sephiroth comes up and cuts a hole in what I thought originally was just like the space-time continuum. And I guess it kind of is, but he cuts a hole. You end up going through it as well with Aerith's help, and the idea here is that you are going to change fate and change destiny, because throughout the game, you had, as Red 13 eventually revealed to us, the arbiters of fate, essentially preserving the timeline you were running through. They did things to alter and change and make sure we were staying the course through the original Final Fantasy VII. They had injured some characters like Jessie so that certain characters would then take the reins and go on missions like Tifa and Cloud, right? They also saved people. They even pulled Aerith, I believe, towards Cloud. And all of a sudden, they essentially made sure Cloud and Aerith met in the beginning. There were a lot of things that they were doing to make sure things were fine. And it was strange for us because not everyone could see them, right? At least not all the time. Sometimes they made themselves very visible, like when they attacked the slums, and it was weird at first, but then as you get towards the end of the game, it all starts to make sense. So, like when, for example, Sephiroth decides to not only kill President Shinra, but then turn around and attempt to kill Barret, I started to realize that while that was a Sephiroth clone, it was still Sephiroth. Sephiroth was fourth wall breaking, essentially. The arbiters couldn't stop him. They could reverse what he did because they brought Barret back to life, right? But they couldn't really stop him. And when Sephiroth sliced a hole in Destiny, essentially, it started to make me wonder, especially after the credits rolled, if he would be a character that goes around between timelines. And that is, anyway, when you do go into the portal for destiny and all this stuff, you fight through, there are some interesting things that happen in there. You fight this big, I think it's just the Harbinger. I can't remember exactly the names of the enemies you are fighting. I know you do fight 3 enemies, of course, that are linked to this very large Whisper. And as you're fighting them and you stagger them, you end up doing damage to the large Whisper. But I run assess on all of the main bosses and sub-boss, all the stuff, to make sure I'm not accidentally healing them with elements or any of that, right? Like ones they absorb. And at times I'll read the passage if it's interesting enough. These ones were extremely interesting, and it led to, I think, a really cool scene. Essentially, you were fighting, I think anyway, your future self. Those 3 enemies you were fighting. One had the sword, of course. That's where the scene really centered around. The other one kept shooting me. I know that. I'm trying to think of what the other one was doing, but I do know those 2. To me, after I read the assessment that says that they were from the future, they were from the future as present forms to try to preserve that timeline that they know of and they exist in, I thought, oh, wow, are we fighting like incarnations of Cloud and Barret and maybe the other one's Tifa, but are we fighting incarnations of that? And then Cloud jumps up.
Bring it on, bitch.
I mean, come on. That's pretty awesome, right? So Cloud looks at his future self, says bring it on. They drop down, and then they win, and they change the timeline. They defeat the big Whispers, the big Harbinger. They defeat Arbiters of Fate. They defeat Sephiroth. At the end, of course, he still gets away. They go to the edge of creation, and it turns out that multiple timelines had changed. And that's kind of the problem I have now. Okay, so right now, there's a blank slate in front of them. All right, so they all survive. Aerith is still alive, and they're kind of looking off in the distance, and Cloud says, look, Sephiroth's still out there. I got to go after him. Now, we saw Biggs still alive. I believe Wedge is still alive. That's not supposed to happen, like, at all in the timeline. They went through, they show the slums being rebuilt, and I don't remember that happening either. So, like, a lot of things have changed right now, and what they are trying to tell us is that this isn't our Final Fantasy from the 90s anymore. They're changing Final Fantasy VII so that they can do an original story in this universe. And that's exciting to me because I want to see what they're going to do with the characters. That means, okay, Aerith may not die, and that's the part that throws me off because Aerith's death is so iconic. I wanted to see it be retold in these visuals with the soundtrack and the cinematography. I think it could have been exceptionally powerful if they could have gone along with it. But I also understand that the developers, the writers, Nomura, they probably don't want to be like handcuffed and have to follow this timeline that was set up in the 90s, especially if they have ideas for these characters that we already know and love, and they want to do more with them or change things up or go in a different route. Now, the part that I'm concerned about, they show Crisis Core, the end of Crisis Core, which I loved this ending. All right. Zack is such a good character for what he had to go through and what happened to him. He's a tragic character because he had to die for Cloud to become the character that many people like now. So he has to, for the timeline to exist where Cloud believes he's a soldier when he's not actually ever a soldier, Cloud has to take Zack's memories, essentially. He, of course, had Mako poisoning, and there was some issues psychologically with him where he started to believe he had Zack's history as the soldier. Zack has to not be around for that to work. The moment Zack makes it to Midgar with Cloud, that could change everything. And there's this really cool scene that I like where Zack lives. He's walking past Aerith and Cloud, and there's this moment, you see it, where it's almost like they realize something has changed somewhere else. And that somewhere else appears to be in a timeline where Zack survives. And they make sure we know it's a different timeline by having like the paper go by. And I was like, wait, the dog's different. That's because this is not the same timeline that this exists in. One is a different time because obviously it was before Cloud was even on his feet and aware of what was happening, right? But 2, the dog's different. So this must be like an alternate timeline. My concern, because they show kind of the Arbiters of Fate around Midgar and all this stuff in Zack's timeline as well, is that Sephiroth has somehow connected the two worlds, or the two timelines. I'm concerned that that means that Sephiroth will be going between them. It can get really complicated, and I'm a little worried that we'll jump between timelines for playable characters, and Sephiroth in one timeline is the same as the Sephiroth in the other, and he just goes between them, and then at the end, everyone comes together and fights against the same Sephiroth. You have like Zack and two Clouds and two Aeriths, and if that happens, that's gonna be an issue. Now, the other way to look at this, and this is the way I'm kind of hoping they go here, sometimes it's good just to have some mystery, right? In this instance, I hope the reason they showed Zack, Aerith, and Cloud, and kind of Cloud hanging off of Zack, walk past each other in opposite directions is because this was the send-off that Zack fans would like to believe exists somewhere in some timeline, that Zack did live, right? That he did make it to Midgar, that he did meet up with Aerith, that they had like a happy ending and all of this stuff. I hope that is where it ends and they don't try to build on that. As much as I would like to see Zack as a playable character in the next one, I think it's better off that they leave it right there. That this was like, hey, everybody who played Crisis Core and who likes Zack as a character, we're going to give you that moment where he survived. He walks past. There's this, like I said, great scene where they walk past, but that's it. After this game, we're going to go back to them traveling, following Sephiroth. I'm sure meeting up with all the different characters, with Yuffie and Kate Sith and Vincent and Sid. All that probably happens, right? Well, we like to assume it happens. But Zack, he had his moment. He lived, and you can kind of fill in the rest with your imagination, or maybe he gets his own game down the road. I mean, sure, they're going to set it up for another game so they can sell more. Okay, I see. I get it. So to me, as long as they don't get too complicated with it, I like what they're doing here. I know some people aren't going to be happy that they have effectively changed things so they can do an original tale because they want to see some of the things that have played out before. But to be honest, the ending for Final Fantasy VII, the original PS1, it wasn't a great ending. It wasn't. If you beat it back in the 90s, like me, you probably weren't happy with it. Advent Children and Dirge of Cerberus kind of came out and retconned some of that anyway, but like, it wasn't great. We even saw, what's really funny is we saw flashbacks to this ending where Red 13 is running through a field, and they cut back to that. That was the ending after the credits, by the way, was Red 13 running through a field, or Descendant or whoever of Red 13 running through a field, valley, and coming up, and you see like, I believe this Midgar kind of overgrown with all types of plants and all this stuff. But then they cut back and they're like, what was that? And Red 13 says that's the future if we don't do something about it. Like it was a bad thing. So to me, that does, to me mean that, oh yeah, even though we heard there were children laughing, I believe, in the background, it's not a desirable outcome. To me, the ending of Final Fantasy VII wasn't great anyway, because it didn't explain anything then, and we had to wait until Advent Children for them to at least say, oh yeah, this is after that happened. Everyone lived. Yeah. Oh, great. Okay, thanks for telling us now. But let me know what you guys think about the ending for Final Fantasy VII Remake down below. I know there's going to be people split on it. It's a fairly controversial decision for the ending, but I at least understand why they did it. I just know not everyone's going to be that excited about it because they wanted to see a remake. But at least it makes sense why this is not called Part 1, because they pretty much did a remake of Final Fantasy VII up until they left Midgar, in which case they decided to get crazy, cut open the space-time continuum, and change Destiny so that they can call the next game anything they want. They could call it Final Fantasy VII Sephiroth or something as they chase after Sephiroth and all this other stuff. So, but let me know what you guys think about this one down below. Make sure you like the video on the way if you enjoyed it. Dislike it if not. And I'll see you next time.